So in 2005, I read what turned out to be, for me, a life-changing book. And it's called I Don't Know How She Does It. And I laughed and I cried my way through that book, as did many of the other women I was working with at the time as a corporate facilitator and an executive coach. And it told the story of a young woman called Kate Reddy, who was doing her best to hold down a really important job and that in a career that she loved, at the same time as having a young family and trying to maintain a relationship with her husband at the same time. And there's a scene that stands out for me in that book, and it was actually the first page of the book. And in the first page of the book, she is bashing the tops of some mince pies that she's brought because she's going to take them to the school Christmas concert. Now, why, you might think, is she bashing the top of them and she's putting icing sugar on the top? Well, she's doing that because the mafia at school, some of the other that she should have made her own. So there's judgment in the fact that she should have made her own. And judgment is a theme that we've been hearing about already this morning, and it's a theme that's rife in the work that we've done. So when we ask working mothers, for example, in our groups, how many of them feel that they've been judged as a working mother? How many of them do you think put their hands up? All of them. So it's interesting, isn't it? So in terms of judgment, I experienced it myself. So I was about to come back to work, and I was in a mother's group, and the mother's group was saying to me, "Oh, you poor thing, Virginia, you've got to go back to work." And I was thinking, thank God I'm going back to work. So I thought, this isn't kind of quite working for me, what I'm getting from this group. And it became my passion and my mission, and it still is, that if you choose as a mother or a father, and we've worked with them both over 12 years, to have a career and have a family and have a version of success that works for you, your family, and your work situation, you have the right to that. And so creating many different versions of what success looks like there is the foundation of what we do. So in terms of what I'm going to do today, I will be sharing a bit of data with you, but the body of data I want to share is the thousands of working men and working women we have now worked with and what they have told us over that 12 years in different parts of the world and in different industries about what faces them and what holds them back. So to give you an idea and share insights about the causes of the motherhood penalty, and in fact it's the parenthood penalty, and also some of the solutions. So can I take a check in the room today? Can you raise your hand, please, if you happen to be a parent? Can you just raise your hand? Take a look around. So look behind you. You'll see there's quite a lot of people in the room who are parents. Keep your hands up, please. Can you raise your hand again? And I'm not trying to out you here. I just want to get a sense. Raise your hand again if you think at some point you might want to be a parent, to add to that. Now keep your hands up. So a few more hands are going up. And if you're not that, you're working with parents, right? Is somebody in there? Yeah. So this actually affects all of us. So let's look at a recent piece of data that came out, and the significant piece here is that it came out from Denmark. Now, this is supposed to be one of the leaders in this space, and it shows the motherhood penalty is alive and kicking. Now, I was a bit shocked when I read this because I thought the Nordics were so far ahead on so many ways, and they are in many ways. In fact, we set up a business, and we launched our business in Denmark last week. And the reality is that it's doing very, very well from a government perspective, but not so well in terms of translating into corporate. So let's move on. What causes this penalty? It's happening at 3 levels. And I want to touch on society first, because all of these play a part. So this has already been alluded to before. What we're looking at here is a biological reality, unless somebody has come up with some research that I don't know about, that women are actually the ones that have the children. So if women are the ones that have the children and we actually want to create a future generation of men and women, We need to look at whether as a society we are giving them rights in their ability to do that, or it's seen as a favour and a kind of inconvenience. So let's have a look at the leader in this space, which is Sweden. This is what their government offers. Now let's look at Australia. Now, I've got the Norwegian flag down at the bottom here. I was at a conference in Copenhagen earlier this year, and the Minister for Children and Equality was speaking. And what she said was that they were just about to follow the Swedish model. Why? Because it works. And why in particular? Because of the last point. The last point being that unless a man takes 90 days of leave, it is lost to that family. Now, what that enables the men to do is to negotiate more powerfully with their employer about their need to take that leave, and it facilitates a woman who wants to come back to the workforce more quickly to be able to do that should she choose to do that and have less impact on her career. What else is happening in Australia? A snapshot. So there's some good news here, and the 14.6% pay gap is the lowest it's been for, well, forever. So there is definitely progress being made, and has already been alluded to. So we do need to focus on the fact that things are going in the right direction. And you can see here, there's still a real penalty for being a woman. There's a penalty for being a mother. So it makes it challenging for us. So there's one other piece of research that I want to share with you, which really comes at this from quite a different angle. And it's to do with the actor. Recognize this woman? Geena Davis. Now, I also heard her speak at the same conference, and she gave a very fascinating talk. Her organisation focuses on this. If she can see it, she can be it. And how appropriate is that in the corporate world as well? So she focuses on gender in the media and in entertainment. And she and her company have developed some software that enables them to look at the top, and what they looked at was the top 100 grossing US movies. Now, why is that relevant? Because we're all watching them. And what do you think they found was the difference between the male and female roles in those movies? Well, the first thing they found, and what Geena finds so ironic about this, as do I, is that actually in fiction, it's worse than fact. So only 22% of the female characters in those movies were employed. 22%. Men were seen 4 times more, and they were heard 7 times more. So that's sending a powerful message in itself, isn't it? That if you're a girl or a young woman, this is where you sit. And if you're a boy or a young man, well, this is where you sit. So I wanted to share that with you as well, because it was so striking to me. And it really teaches us to be careful, doesn't it? What we actually watch and what we let our children have a look at, or at least talk them through. So moving on, I'd like to move on now to looking at the causes and the impact from that large group that I told you about that we've worked with over now 12 years, and what they say are the key themes they're facing. What are some of the causes, and what are some of the solutions in best practice organisations? Oh, and before I do that, this is your data in Women in Finance off the WGEA website. So still a way to go here. These will not surprise you. Jana, you mentioned that very nicely here, the lack of communication at work and home. These are the 4 that come up time and time and time again. So what do we mean by these? Lack of role models. Essentially, what we hear at the moment is that people look up in their organisation and they don't really like what they see, or they don't see enough variety. So the main point they get is this, that success comes in one size. And essentially, it's if you work full-time. So one of my colleagues, who's the CEO of a business in the UK, I think puts this really beautifully in terms of working parents. So what do we hear particularly? And I'm going to summarise the essence of what we hear. That women look up if they're a working mother and they don't see enough females working in a part-time capacity in a leading role, particularly a line role. They also don't see enough women progressing when they're on during that parental leave period. Okay, that's what they see. What do dads see? They look up and they don't see very many men taking extended parental leave. They don't see very many men working flexibly. So that sends them a message that it's not really okay for them to do that. And actually, they've seen what happens to the women who do that. And people who want to work flexibly for a whole range of reasons look up and they say, flexibility is only for people who have caring responsibilities here. So that's what we're dealing with. So what's the solution? Now, I like this expression of real models. So what we're looking at here is for more variety of the ways in which it can be done and the ways in which it can work, and more championing and communicating about those different ways. So it is, an example that stands out for me is a woman that one of my colleagues is coaching at the moment, who's returning from leave very shortly. On a 3-day week, she was promoted while she was on leave. And the company is seeing the investment in her as a long-term investment versus a short-term what's happening. That's what the smart companies are doing about this. They're looking at this in a completely different perspective. The other, in terms of men, what we're wanting here, and I totally agree with what you've already said here, is that we need to be encouraging more conversation, especially from people who are more senior positions, talking to junior men, more junior men coming through and saying, this is okay, and this is what I do with my family, and this is how it works. Okay? The other thing that we want to look at here is being the real model. Now, somebody's actually said this today before. It takes some courage sometimes. Sometimes you will actually be the first person doing this. And that's okay. One of the other things with being the role model is it's really important if you are a leader that you are demonstrating your policies. Otherwise, policy is not practice. So one example I'd like to give you of this is the managing partner we work with on the other side of the world, actually. And they came up with a policy within this organization called timeout, which meant you could request an extra month's leave for a whole range of different reasons. Now, she was one of the first people to do that. And then she talked about it a lot, which gave the other people in her organization a great deal of permission to follow suit. What's next? Assumptions and mindsets. Now, we've talked about this. This is the area of bias. And this area with working parents is rife in terms of this. And the top ones that come up, you can see there on the left. Do you relate to any of these? Yeah. So what people get the sense of is that if I can't see you all the time, or you're coming back on a part-time basis, what does that tell me about how serious you are about your career? And we've already heard from the McKinsey research, there's no evidence to suggest that ambition is any less from a woman when she returns. But this is the impression they get. Now, I actually had one person with the next one, presenteeism equals performance, a story that stands out. This person had been rated as a very, very high performer, and they came back to work and were told that they couldn't be rated at that rating anymore because they hadn't been there for 6 months. So it wasn't possible to give them a high rating. So this whole focus on visibility, you actually have to be seen in order to perform. And in an area of when we're living through the age of technology, that just seems ludicrous. The third piece here is manager inconsistency. So we hear so regularly in terms of assumptions and mindsets. So many managers are doing a great job of this. I wish we could bottle them and send them out to everybody else. But unfortunately, even within progressive organizations, there's a whole other group who are very blocked about this. And I'm going to give one example. I was working with a group of managers, and I had one manager say, but this person is working from home, so I actually don't really know that they are working. So I need a solution to know that they're actually working. And one of their colleagues said, well, I think what you could do is get them to write down a list of what you want them to achieve for you in that day. And this was a very large team this manager had. And I simply said, so is that what you're actually going to do for everybody in your team, including the people who are there? Get them to write down a list of what you want them to achieve in the day. Is that what you're going to do? And this manager did have, because I'd called them and they're thinking, stepped back and went, oh, no, of course I wouldn't be doing that. So what's the mindset behind that? So this comes back to, and Jen, you've already made this point as well. Oh, this is what's happening. Actually, I do want to say something about this. This is something for you to really watch as women. If you don't tell people what you want to do when you come back, they will assume some of the assumptions at the top here. So it's very much about needing to communicate, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. So we've got to focus on output. Now, this is a point that's already been made, but that's evidence. Our thinking is often very faulty. So measure it against what the person is actually achieving versus what your mindset is telling you. Second part here is you've got to challenge your own mindset here. Sometimes you're part of the problem. You're thinking that you can't achieve something that you're perfectly capable of achieving. So challenging mindsets is key. As is building this manager consistency. I'm delighted to hear about the work you're doing with the flexible work. Those are sessions that we have run for a long time as well. And it's actually, to answer the question about mandated, in one large professional services firm that we're working with, they're mandated. And that sends a very powerful message too, that we're serious about this, so you need to get on board. Okay. This is a big one, lack of communication, and it fuels mindset. If you do not communicate what you are thinking, either at work or at home, and get clarity on both, people make it up. And they might be making up something that you don't want them to make up, because that's actually not the case, but you're not talking about it. Now, why are you not talking about it? People generally, and this was referred to by an earlier speaker as well, don't really like having difficult conversations. Well, that's fair enough. We don't exactly relish it. So at the same time, they're required. But what happens here is that managers of working parents say, I don't want to be discriminatory here. I'm a bit worried that I might say something that might be the wrong thing. So I don't really know how to have this conversation. And then you go over here with the working parent who's just come back to work, or maybe further down the track. They're exhausted. They're just they're just busy getting on with trying to manage the two perspectives. So a lot of these conversations actually are not happening, and particularly conversations around career, because what women tend to focus on, and I'm generalizing here, and working mothers focus on, is getting the job done. They don't focus on what might come next in their career, and so they haven't got their head up looking for that and can often get overlooked. So the obvious solution here is to initiate the conversation. And yes, that means you individually, and it means managers. And what best practice organizations are doing are facilitating the process of enabling that kind of conversation to happen. By processes in place, it's time for you to ring so-and-so now, and then by actually giving them the skills to have those kinds of conversations so they feel comfortable with them. For the working mothers in this room, I ask a question of you that we ask of all our participants. If I was to go and speak to all of your key stakeholders now and say, what are this person's career ambitions in the short and mid and long term, would they know how to answer that question? And if they don't, and they wouldn't, then you might have some work to do, because otherwise they might have a different impression in mind and you will get potentially overlooked. In terms of at home, now I'm glad I've met somebody else who's like me, because my husband and I did exactly what you're talking about. And I think sometimes people think, well, that's a bit extreme. We used to have a Sunday night dinner where we talk about who's doing what this week. Before we had children, I had already talked to each other about do we think our roles were going to be in this, how is it going to work, etc. Not surprising, I'm in this business, really, when you look at that history. But it's really critical. They say, and in the Fatherhood Institute in the UK, they say that arguments between couples go up by 5 times when they have children. And most people in our group say, is that all? So they usually think it's more than that. Okay, and that's because, and I am going to again generalize here, the women in the rooms tell us that the default position, unless previously negotiated, is them. So they end up doing more of this, and that's proven in the stats too. But the men tell us, but I have to, when I do things, they criticize. They go, you're not really going to put them in that, are you? Or, did you put that in their lunch box again for the second day in a row? So we're our own worst enemies in terms of, yes, we want to share it, but you're not doing it the right way. All right, so that becomes problematic. So instead, what we really do need to do here is actually have an unpaid job description. So we have job description for work, so everybody knows who's responsible for what. But we have unpaid work, which is big. You're running a house, you're running children, how are you going to manage all of that? Who's going to do what? And having conversations about that. So it's actually really important that this whole area of gender equality, that we're focusing on what happens at home as well, not just what happens at work. And that the number of times I've heard people talk about, my husband's very good, he helps, which shows an attitude of, I'm still expecting it's my job. And finally, look at this one. Now, it puts a smile on your face, but it's actually quite sad, and we experience it all the time. Most fathers who are returning to work have taken 2 weeks off. They come back to work, they're exhausted, they're stressed out about their partner, who's very stressed out. And then they come back into work, and it's almost like business as usual. And they are asked quite often, how was your holiday? So people haven't got on top of the fact that actually these people need some support too, because they aren't obviously pregnant. They just disappear and then they come back. So what's problematic about this is the range of support that companies are actually offering. And I'm going to agree with Jen again here, that one of the causes of this is that the support we offer is far too women-focused. Now, what message does that send? It sends the message that it's a woman's problem. It sends the message that it's a woman's responsibility, and it alienates men. And men, correct me if I'm wrong, are still leading this country, corporate. And we're disengaging them. And there was a recent article that came out, actually yesterday in the Sydney Morning Herald at the University of Canberra, where they said that over half the men felt disengaged in gender equality initiatives because they weren't included. So we need to be doing far more here to engage the other part of the population, because this is a business issue and it's a family issue. It's not a women's issue. So what does that mean? It means championing men and dads' support. It means offering them the support that we're offering to women and not overlooking them, because the men we talk to are quite tired of being overlooked. And this one's been covered as well. We're living in an environment where managers need to be prepared and able to deal with a flexible workforce. It's the new normal, but they're not. And they're resisting it. The leadership at the top are fine with it. The people coming through are fine with it. The people in the middle are quite challenged by it, because they're thinking, how on earth am I going to do this without making my job so much harder? So what we need to be doing is supporting them to be able to manage that flexibility, so that we really can offer flexibility for a whole range of reasons, which then stops the competition or sometimes the bad feeling between people who are carers and people who are not, because everybody could have some flexibility for a whole range of reasons. So what do I want to leave you with today? There's responsibility at each part of this: society, organisational and individual. If I had a wish list here, if I could just wave a magic wand and say one thing in each, I would say the one thing from a society level we need to do is shift the dial on parental rights, particularly for dads. If there was one thing I could wish for at an organisational level, it's to really champion and find different versions of success versus a full-time only approach at leadership level. And as for you, be the model. Be the real model. Choose your own version of success and support other people to have theirs. So be the real model. Thank you.
Virginia, thank you so much. So many powerful messages. Does anyone else sense a theme coming on after this morning? I feel like there's a few key things for us to take here. But as always, opportunity to ask some questions of Virginia while we have her. So who's going to come up and ask a question? Yes, good hand. Or you can speak in your loud voice.
Hi, I'm Sue Rosen. Virginia, thank you. Out of that report that I read yesterday as well,
Yeah.
summarised in the Herald, there was talk in there as well about some backlash from
Yeah.
men now after, Me Too and Time's Up
Yeah.
and feeling excluded.
Yeah.
And I wondered if, are you seeing that as well? There was a quote in there about some men saying, this is political correctness gone too far, means I no longer get the opportunity at the job.
Yeah.
Along those lines.
Yeah.
I was horrified by that, but I'm wondering if you're seeing that on the ground as well.
I'm certainly seeing that people are feeling really overlooked and excluded. And when they're overlooked and excluded, then they start to get assumptions and start worrying about, what that's going to mean for them. So I think it's in our group, certainly, it's been more around the fact that, hey, why does everybody think it's only women who need this kind of support? Here we are, and we're the kind of new version of dads today. We're pioneering this. We have partners who are expecting a great deal more from us at home because they have their own career, and we are still wanting to progress ours, and we're not really given the same level of help unless we've had extended leave. So that's where they feel overlooked and sensitive in the groups that I've been running, or that we've been running. Yeah.
Right. Anyone else? Time for one more? God, we've got to get above our one question average. But please all join me in welcoming. You're free to say again, but thank you, Virginia, for her fantastic presentation.